at finding the midpoint by using the midpoint formula or a graph, right? Just kind of getting used to finding the middle point of a line segment. So when we're finding the midpoint, one thing we want to understand is the coordinates of the midpoint of a segment are the average of the endpoints of the x's and the average of the endpoints of the y's. So that's really how this formula comes into play. We're averaging the x's together, and then separately, we're averaging the y's together. Right? So we're just trying to find that middle x and that middle y coordinate point. Now, let's take a look at kind of two strategies to working with this and giving this a little bit of practice. First one is if we want to find the midpoint graphically. So one way to find the midpoint graphically is to plot the points out on a grid. And then kind of like the slope, you're going to count up and over. But since we're looking for the middle point, right, this graph goes 1, 2, 3, 4 up, and then 4 over. So what we're going to do this graphically is instead of counting 4 up, we'll go 2 up, and then we'll come 2 over, and we'll see where they meet. And these both meet right here at this coordinate point. And if we look at that coordinate point on our grid, it's going to be -3, comma, -3, right? So the midpoint is -3, comma, -3 for this first problem. For the second one, we're going to kind of take the formula approach. So it says find the midpoint of the line segment connecting the points 5, 3, and 7, -2. So the midpoint is when we average the x's. So we're going to take our two x values, 5 plus 7, divide that by 2. And then we're going to do the same thing with the y values. So we're going to take 3 plus -2 and divide that by 2. And then when we do that, we'll just simplify, right? So 5 plus 7 is 12, 12 divided by 2 is 6, comma, and then 3 plus -2 is 1, and then that's just over 2. So we'll keep our answers, we could keep our answer in that fraction form, but there we go, 6, comma, 1/2. All right, now sometimes though with the midpoint questions is we're not trying to find the midpoint, but we might be given an endpoint and a midpoint, and we're trying to find the other endpoint. So a couple ways I like to work with this. I don't like to use the formula typically here. It does get a little bit tricky sometimes, so kind of do this either graphically or we'll almost kind of do it visually in like a fake graph. So this first one here, let's take a look at graphically. It says find the other endpoint of the line segment given the midpoint is at 0, 0. So here's one endpoint. Let's call this maybe line segment AB. So here's A. The midpoint is here at 0, 0, and B is going to be somewhere down here in that bottom left, right? That line will continue. So the way we could do this graphically is we're going to kind of like count the slope over. So we're going to the midpoint. So we're going over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over. And then we're going 1, 2, 3, 4 down, right? So I went 5 to the left and 4 down to get to the midpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that same steps over. I'm going to go 5 to the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to count 4 down, 1, 2, 3, 4. And once I do that, that's going to be my other endpoint. That's going to be coordinate point B. And B we could see is located at -5, comma, -4. Right, so it's just a matter of kind of like recounting those slopes. We want to copy the same slope past the midpoint. Now, another way to do this, if you don't want to graph them all the time, is kind of more of like a diagram approach. So we're going to have given line AB from A is 4, -2, and the midpoint of the line is 6, -5. Our goal is we want to find point B. So we know we have this line going from coordinate point A, which is at 4, -2, and it ends at B, but the problem is we don't know what B is. Lucky for us is we do know what the midpoint is, 6, -5. So the middle, right, the midpoint is the same distance away from A as it is from B, but the idea is it's got X and Y distance, so we got to account for both. So one way we'll work with this is I'm going to look at my X's. I'm going to go from 4 to 6, and to go from 4 to 6, I have to add 2. So to get to my other X value, I'm going to have to do the same thing. So 6 plus 2, and I get 8. Dealing with this, but with the Y values, to go from -2 to -5, I had to subtract 3. So to get to the other endpoint, I'm going to have to subtract 3 again, and negative 5 minus 3 is going to get me negative 8. So I end up with the endpoint of 8 comma negative 8. Right, so those are the two strategies that we see with midpoint. There's some practice on the back of the worksheet. Give it a look and let me know if you guys have any questions.